In the quiet corridors of the Smithsonian Institution's archives, Dr. Sarah Chen carefully adjusted her white cotton gloves as morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the National Museum of American History. The 34-year-old digital restoration specialist had spent the last 5 years bringing historical photographs back to life, transforming faded memories into crystal-clear windows to the past. Her small laboratory, tucked away on the third floor, was filled with state-of-the-art equipment that hummed softly in the controlled environment. But nothing had prepared her for what she was about to uncover on this crisp November morning in Washington, D.C. This came in yesterday from a private collector in Boston. Her colleague Marcus Williams explained, his footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway as he approached her workstation. The 42-year-old archivist placed a weathered manila envelope on the restoration table, with the reverence reserved for potentially priceless artifacts. Claims it's an unpublished photograph of Gandhi from 1914, during his time in South Africa. If it's authentic, Sarah, this could be groundbreaking. Sarah's pulse quickened, her dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Finding unknown images of historical figures was like discovering buried treasure in her field, a rush that never got old despite years of experience. She had restored photographs of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and countless other historical luminaries. But Gandhi? This was different. This was monumental. She opened the envelope with surgical precision, her movements deliberate and measured. The photograph that emerged was a testament to time's relentless march, a sepia-toned image that had seen far better days. Water stains created abstract patterns across the surface, and the edges were frayed and discolored. Yet through the damage, she could make out the unmistakable figure of a young Mohandas Gandhi, in his lawyer's attire, standing beside what appeared to be a courthouse steps. "Look at the authentication papers," Marcus continued, pulling up a chair beside her. His voice carried that particular excitement historians develop when they sense they're touching something significant. The collector's grandfather was a British journalist named Edmund Hartwell, stationed in Johannesburg from 1913 to 1915. According to his journal entries, and we've verified the handwriting, he took this during one of Gandhi's early civil rights protests outside the Transvaal Supreme Court. Sarah positioned the photograph under her high-resolution scanner, the machine's LED lights illuminating every crack and stain with clinical precision. Her trained eye immediately began cataloging the damage. Severe water damage in the upper right corner, possible chemical staining along the left edge, and what looked like deliberate scratching across Gandhi's face, as if someone had tried to obscure or damage the image intentionally. "The interesting thing," Marcus added, leaning closer to examine the photograph, "is that Hartwell's journal mentions this specific day, March 15, 1914. He wrote about Gandhi giving an impromptu speech after a court hearing about the immigration tax. But here's what's strange. Hartwell mentions that Gandhi appeared marked by recent events, but never elaborated on what he meant. As Sarah began the painstaking digital restoration process, loading the high-resolution scan into her specialized software, she couldn't shake the feeling that this photograph held secrets beyond its obvious historical significance. The advanced algorithms would take hours to process each layer of damage, gradually peeling back decades of deterioration like an archaeological dig in reverse. "You know what bothers me?" Sarah said, adjusting the color correction parameters on her monitor. "Look at Gandhi's posture here. In every other photograph from this period, he's either standing straight or in that characteristic meditation pose. But here," she zoomed in on the figure, "his left shoulder is slightly raised and his hand is positioned as if he's protecting something." Marcus nodded, studying the image more closely. "And look at the other people in the background. That man in the dark suit, he's not looking at Gandhi or the camera. He's looking at something off to the side, as if something unexpected was happening." The rain began to tap against the windows as Washington, D.C. settled into another gray November afternoon. Outside, tourists hurried between monuments, umbrellas blooming like black flowers along the National Mall. But inside the climate-controlled archive, time seemed suspended, as Sarah Chen prepared to embark on a digital journey that would peel back 110 years of history, layer by careful layer. As the initial scan completed and the restoration software began its preliminary analysis, Sarah noticed something that made her breath catch. In the bottom corner of the photograph, barely visible through the damage, was what appeared to be a partial stamp or marking, something that suggested this image had been deliberately hidden or stored away. Little did she know her work over the coming days would reveal something that would not only challenge everything historians thought they knew about Gandhi's early life, but would also uncover a secret that powerful people had spent over a century trying to keep buried. The discovery was about to begin. 3 days later, Sarah Chen arrived at the Smithsonian earlier than usual, clutching a steaming cup of coffee from the vendor outside the National Museum. Sleep had eluded her for the past 2 nights, not because of stress, but because of anticipation. The preliminary restoration results had revealed tantalizing glimpses of details hidden beneath decades of damage, and today's high-resolution analysis would finally unveil what the photograph had been hiding. Marcus was already waiting in her laboratory, pacing nervously between the workstations. "I've been here since 6 a.m., he admitted sheepishly. "I couldn't sleep either. Did you see the email from Dr. Peterson?" Sarah nodded, settling into her chair and powering up the restoration workstation. Dr. Elizabeth Peterson, the museum's chief historian, had expressed intense interest in their discovery after Marcus's preliminary report. Word was spreading through the academic community that something significant was brewing in the archives. "The overnight processing finished at 4:17 a.m., Sarah said, pulling up the results on her main monitor. "I ran the advanced damage removal algorithms, cross-referenced with period-appropriate lighting correction, and applied the latest facial reconstruction protocols." As the restored image materialized on screen, both researchers fell silent. The transformation was stunning. What had been a severely damaged, barely recognizable photograph now revealed itself as a crystal-clear window into 1914 Johannesburg. Gandhi's face emerged with startling clarity, his eyes intense and focused, his lawyer's attire impeccably detailed. But it wasn't Gandhi's clothing or expression that made Sarah's hands tremble as she adjusted the zoom level. It was what the restoration had revealed on the left side of his face, a distinctive crescent-shaped scar running from just below his ear to the corner of his mouth, a scar that appeared fresh, still healing, with the telltale signs of recent stitching. "My God," Marcus whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "That's not just any scar, Sarah. Look at the shape, the positioning. That's from a knife wound, and a recent one based on the coloration visible in the photograph." Sarah's mind raced through her extensive knowledge of Gandhi's documented history. Every biography, every historical account she'd ever read had made no mention of such a scar, yet here it was, preserved in silver halide and now revealed by digital restoration. Undeniable evidence of some violent encounter that had been completely erased from the historical record. "We need to call Dr. Peterson immediately," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. But Marcus caught her wrist gently. "Wait, before we make this public, we need to understand what we're looking at. This isn't just about a previously unknown photograph anymore. If Gandhi was attacked, injured badly enough to leave a permanent scar, and it was covered up, we're dealing with a systematic alteration of historical records." Sarah pulled up additional analysis tools, examining the photograph's metadata and chemical composition. "The dating is definitely accurate. The paper, the silver content, even the chemical signatures all confirm 1914. And look at this." She highlighted an area near Gandhi's collar. "There are small spots here that the spectral analysis identifies as bloodstains. Old blood, but definitely human." The implications were staggering. Here was evidence of violence against one of history's most famous advocates for nonviolence, an incident so significant that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase it from public knowledge. Marcus walked to the window, staring out at the gray DC skyline. "Think about it, Sarah. We're talking about 1914, the height of British colonial power, rising tensions in South Africa, and Gandhi was already becoming a thorn in their side. What if this wasn't just a random attack? What if someone tried to silence him permanently?" Sarah continued her analysis, discovering additional details that deepened the mystery. "There's something else. Look at the background figures again, now that we have the clear image." She enhanced a section behind Gandhi, revealing 3 men in official-looking uniforms watching from a distance. Those aren't journalists or bystanders. Based on their uniforms and positioning, they look like colonial police or security forces. "They're watching him," Marcus observed, returning to the workstation. "Not protecting, watching, as if they're waiting for something to happen or maybe ensuring something doesn't happen again." The restored photograph was revealing itself to be more than just a historical artifact. It was evidence of a cover-up that had lasted over a century. Every official photograph of Gandhi from this period showed him unmarked, unscarred. Every biographical account described his early activism in South Africa without mentioning any violent attacks. As Sarah prepared to document their findings, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Chen, we understand you're working on some interesting historical materials. We'd like to meet." The message was unsigned, but something about its timing made both researchers exchange worried glances. News of their discovery had been kept strictly within museum channels, or so they thought. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the windows of the archive as if the past itself was trying to break free from its carefully constructed constraints. Sarah Chen and Marcus Williams were about to learn that some secrets are buried so deep that uncovering them attracts the attention of people who prefer the truth to remain hidden. The revelation was complete, but the real danger was just beginning. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Smithsonian. Dr. Rajesh Patel, a distinguished historian from Columbia University and leading Gandhi scholar, arrived unannounced at Sarah's laboratory just as the first rays of sunlight pierced through Washington, D.C.'s persistent November cloud cover. His usually composed demeanor seemed strained, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept well. The 58-year-old academic, whose research on Gandhi's South African period had earned him international recognition, carried himself with an urgency that immediately put both researchers on alert. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams," he said, his British-accented English carrying a weight that filled the sterile laboratory space. "I understand you've made a remarkable discovery regarding a 1914 photograph. I believe we need to discuss what you've found, and more importantly, what it means for our understanding of history itself." Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus before gesturing for Dr. Patel to sit in the chair beside her workstation. The mysterious text message from the previous day still weighed heavily on their minds, and now this unexpected visit felt far from coincidental. The timing was too precise, too convenient to be mere academic curiosity. "How did you know about our work?" Marcus asked directly, his journalist instincts kicking in. "We haven't published anything yet, and the information has been kept strictly confidential within museum channels. Even Dr. Peterson only received our preliminary report yesterday afternoon." Dr. Patel smiled sadly, the expression carrying decades of academic burden, and carefully removed a worn leather journal from his weathered briefcase. The journal's binding was cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle, but the careful preservation suggested it had been treasured and protected across generations. "Because, Dr. Williams, this isn't the first time this photograph has been discovered. My grandfather, Dr. Arjun Patel, was Gandhi's personal physician in South Africa from 1913 to 1915. This journal contains his complete medical records and personal observations from that turbulent period in Gandhi's early activism." Sarah's heart rate accelerated as Dr. Patel opened the journal to a page marked with a faded silk ribbon. The handwriting was careful and precise, typical of medical documentation from the early 1900s, written in blue-black ink that had faded but remained legible after more than a century. "March 16, 1914, Dr. Patel read aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. Treated MG for severe laceration to left facial region extending from temporomandibular joint to oral commissure. Wound consistent with knife attack, approximately 4 inches in length. Required 14 silk sutures using carbolic acid antiseptic. Patient conscious and alert throughout procedure. Refused laudanum for pain management. Patient insists incident must remain confidential for the safety of the movement and his followers. Agreed to alter official medical records per his explicit request. May God forgive us for this necessary deception." The laboratory fell silent, except for the soft humming of restoration equipment and the distant sounds of DC traffic filtering through the reinforced windows. Here was independent corroboration of what their digital restoration had revealed. Gandhi had indeed been attacked and scarred, and the cover-up had been orchestrated by the man himself. "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared at the restored photograph on her monitor. "Why would Gandhi himself want to hide evidence of an attack? Wouldn't that prove the very real dangers faced by civil rights activists? Wouldn't it generate sympathy and support for his cause?" Dr. Patel turned several pages in the journal, his fingers tracing the faded entries with reverent care. "My grandfather recorded Gandhi's explanation in extraordinary detail. The attack wasn't random street violence. It was carried out by extremist elements within the Indian independence community who believed Gandhi's non-violent approach was too weak, too accommodating to British colonial power. They wanted to force him into more aggressive action by making him a bloodied martyr." Marcus leaned forward, studying the journal entries over Dr. Patel's shoulder. "So they attacked him to radicalize him?" "Precisely. They believed that if Gandhi experienced violence firsthand, he would abandon his philosophy of satyagraha, non-violent resistance, and embrace more militant tactics. But Gandhi realized that if news of the attack spread, it would fracture the movement between those calling for violent retribution and those supporting his peaceful resistance. He chose unity over personal vindication." Sarah pulled up the restored image on her monitor, examining Gandhi's posture with new understanding. His slightly raised left shoulder, the protective positioning of his left hand, the way his body seemed to shield the left side of his face. He was literally hiding his healing wound while continuing his public activism. "According to these records," Dr. Patel continued, opening to another marked page, "Gandhi never missed a single scheduled public appearance. Between March 16th and April 3rd, 1915, while the wound was healing and the stitches were still visible, he gave 17 public speeches, attended 12 community meetings, and participated in 3 protest marches. My grandfather wrote detailed observations about Gandhi's remarkable pain tolerance and his determination to maintain his public schedule. Dr. Patel's voice grew emotional as he read directly from the journal. March 25, 1914. Removed sutures from MG's facial wound. Healing progressing normally, though scar tissue formation is significant. Patient continues to refuse pain medication, claiming that physical discomfort serves as reminder of the spiritual challenge ahead. When I suggested he might rest for a few more days, he replied, "Doctor, the moment I show weakness or seek sympathy through my wounds, I become no better than those who inflicted them. The scar will heal and fade, but the lesson must remain pure." As the full story emerged, Sarah realized they weren't just looking at a hidden photograph. They were witnessing one of the earliest and most profound examples of Gandhi's extraordinary commitment to his principles. He had literally borne his scars in silence to preserve the moral clarity of his message and prevent his movement from fracturing into competing factions. The remarkable thing, Dr. Patel said, turning to a section of the journal filled with newspaper clippings, is how effectively the secret was kept. Look at these contemporary accounts from the Johannesburg Star, the Cape Times, even Indian newspapers of the period. Every single one describes Gandhi as unmarked by recent events or showing remarkable composure. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that no photographic evidence of the attack ever reached the public. Marcus studied the clippings, noting the consistency of the descriptions. But how was that possible? Surely other people at his speeches would have noticed the wound, the stitches. That's where the story becomes even more remarkable. Dr. Patel smiled, turning to one of the final entries in the journal. My grandfather documented an elaborate system of concealment. Gandhi would position himself carefully during speeches, always keeping his left side away from photographers and reporters. His wife Kasturba helped by applying a mixture of theatrical makeup and traditional Indian cosmetics to minimize the visible scarring. Even his closest associates were sworn to secrecy. The text message Sarah had received the previous day suddenly made more sense. Dr. Patel reached into his briefcase and withdrew his phone. The message you received yesterday was from my research assistant, Jennifer Morrison. I've been tracking references to this specific photograph for 15 years, ever since I inherited my grandfather's journal and began researching the gaps in Gandhi's documented biography. When word reached me through Columbia's academic network that the Smithsonian was conducting advanced restoration work on Gandhi materials, I knew the time had finally come. Sarah leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications of their discovery. So we're not just looking at historical revisionism, we're seeing proof of Gandhi's first great moral victory. He chose principle over martyrdom, unity over personal vindication. Exactly, Dr. Patel nodded. And there's one more crucial detail. He turned to the journal's final entry about the incident. My grandfather recorded that 3 weeks after the attack, Gandhi personally visited the men who had wounded him. Instead of pressing charges or seeking retribution, he spent hours discussing the philosophy of non-violence with them. 2 of the 3 attackers became devoted followers of his movement by the end of 1914. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, processing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Outside, tourists moved between the monuments and museums of the National Mall, most of them unaware that just floors above their heads, one of history's greatest secrets was finally being revealed. The question now, Dr. Patel said, closing his grandfather's journal and looking directly at Sarah and Marcus, is what we do with this truth. Gandhi chose to hide it for the good of his movement, to prevent violence and preserve unity. Do we honor that choice even now, 110 years later? Or do we believe that the world is finally ready to see that even the greatest advocates for peace sometimes bear the hidden scars of their absolute convictions? Sarah stared at the restored photograph on her monitor, seeing it now not just as a historical artifact but as a testament to extraordinary moral courage. The young lawyer in the image had chosen to absorb violence rather than reflect it, to hide his wounds rather than use them as weapons of sympathy, to protect a principle more precious to him than his own historical legacy. The laboratory filled with contemplative silence as 3 scholars considered the weight of their decision. Through the windows, the gray November afternoon was giving way to early evening, and the lights of Washington, D.C. began to twinkle in the distance. History itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see whether Gandhi's century-old secret would finally be revealed to the world. "We publish it all," Marcus said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "The photograph, the medical records, my grandfather's journal entries, the complete story. Because the real discovery isn't that Gandhi was attacked, it's that he chose forgiveness and secrecy over martyrdom and revenge. He chose to heal privately rather than wound publicly. That's a lesson our world needs more desperately than ever. Dr. Patel smiled, the first genuine expression of relief Sarah had seen cross his face since his arrival. I was hoping you would say that. My grandfather's final wish was that this story would someday be told when the world was ready to understand its true meaning. As winter darkness settled over the nation's capital, 3 dedicated scholars sat around a computer screen displaying a 110-year-old photograph that had finally revealed its secrets. In restoring Gandhi's hidden scar, they had uncovered something far more valuable than historical trivia. They had found proof that true strength sometimes lies not in displaying our wounds to the world, but in choosing how we heal from them and whom we choose to forgive. The restoration was complete, but the real discovery, about courage, forgiveness, and the hidden sacrifices of moral leadership, had only just begun to change how the world would remember one of history's greatest figures.